All right. Hi. All right. Good morning again. Happy Sabbath. I hope you guys are doing all right. Maybe not good, but at least fine. So this morning, I'm sorry again. I'll be sharing a standalone message. I was actually planning to start a series, and this series I'm planning to do on a topic called theodicy. It's a technical term, but theodicy is deals with or is an explanation of if there is God who is all loving and all powerful, then why is there evil? Theodicy is an attempt to answer that question. And I was thinking about doing a series on that topic. However, I thought, I was preparing this week, but I thought I was not ready yet. I was not there yet, and I didn't want to present a poor quality sermon to you, so I decided to just leave it later for hopefully by next week I'll be able to start on that topic. But for this morning, so this is just one single sermon. But it's taken from Genesis chapter 47, verses 7 to 10. And I'm sorry for those of you who were at 2017 Big Bear Retreat and with good memories. It seems, I didn't remember, but according to my own record, I spoke from this text at that time. I know you guys have good memories, so you might remember. I'm sorry for you. But yeah, I'll be sharing from this same text. Apparently, I love this text. And I hope that this sermon has been refurbished. I actually wrote as much as I could, a technical and academic paper on this 4 verses at seminary. So I hope that my understanding has been deepened, and I hope to be able to share this great story. And this story I entitled The Paradox of Blessings. I'm not trying to be cool, but yeah, this is the title that I came up with. And the subtitle is 130 Years of Few and Miserable Life. 130 Years of Few and Miserable Life. So let me read the text. Genesis 47, 7 to 10. Let me get my, Okay. It reads, Then Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, How many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. And they have not attained to the days of the years of my life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Now, let me tell you that one of my favorite characters, if not my most favorite characters in the Bible, is Jacob. And let me add to that, one of my favorite stories of Jacob is this, verses 7 to 10 of Genesis chapter 47. And some of you may be like, what? Why? I mean, why this story? Why this text? I mean, it's short. It's simple and it's weird, right? I mean, let me just share the context. So this is the transition phase. This is pretty important time for the people of God. Because as you can see from the chapter, Genesis is almost closing, right? Genesis chapter 50 is the last chapter. And we have seen, starting from Adam, Noah, and then we go to the patriarchs, the days of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So in Genesis, we see these great fathers, these great figures. And then after that patriarchs, we see the children of these patriarchs. You know, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and his 12 sons were called Israelites, right? So if we go to the next book of Genesis, which is Exodus, we see the Israelites under oppression by Egyptians. So we see them go out of Egypt, right? And here in Genesis chapter 47, I'm sorry, let me supply more stories, context here. So I hope you know the story of Joseph, a very famous story. So Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob, and yet he was sold by his brothers, and he was enslaved in Egypt. But by God's miraculous providence, he was raised up to a position next to Pharaoh to save the country and all those around the country from 7 years of famine. Right? And there is this dramatic encounter where Joseph's brothers come to ask for food in Egypt. They meet Joseph. Right? And there is some conversation, there are some things happening. And then afterwards, Joseph invites the whole family, his father, Jacob as well, to come reside in Egypt. Because in Egypt, there was enough food for them, enough land for them to have their sheep flocked. Right? So here is an important phase in that these patriarchs who have been sojourning around the promised land of Canaan is now moved in to Egypt. And now they are expecting to go out like 400 some years later. Right? So this is a very important point for the people of God, right? And in the middle of this story, we find these texts, Genesis 47, 7 to 10. And I would like to point out that there are two meetings recorded in Genesis 47. So as I said, the family of Jacob, the Israelites, has just moved in to Egypt. And they are brought before Pharaoh before they actually settle in to the land of Egypt. And this first meeting takes place between Pharaoh and the brothers of Joseph. And let me read, I cut some parts, but let me read Genesis chapter 47, 2 to 6. It reads, "And from among Joseph's brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, 'What is your occupation?' And they said to Pharaoh, 'Your servants are shepherds. Please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen.' Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen.'" So as you see, this very formal nature of this meeting, right? So the family has moved in. Joseph presents the family, these 5 chosen brothers, before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asks them, "What do you do?" "We are shepherds. We would like to live in this land." Pharaoh says, "Go ahead." Right? And we actually see this result coming in verse 11, which is after the text that we are covering this morning. Genesis 47:11 says, "Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded." So let me ask you a question. Was the meeting between the brothers and Pharaoh successful? Yes, indeed, right? They came to the land, they asked for a land to live, Pharaoh had granted them. And they are living by verse 11 already. Right? Was their meeting sufficient? It seems like. I mean, this business-like formal meeting seems to have dealt with what had to be dealt with between the family and Pharaoh, right? However, we find this another meeting, that one that just we read, between Jacob and Pharaoh. And we ask, so what is the significance of this meeting? I mean, all the business has been taken care of between the brothers or the sons with Pharaoh, right? So why the need for Jacob to come before Pharaoh? And that's what we would like to see this morning. So let us read closely. It says in Genesis 47:7, "Then Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh." And I have many points that I would like to point out even in this verse itself, but for time's sake, I will just cut it. But here we see, after the brothers were introduced to Pharaoh, Joseph brings his father. And what happens first is not, oops, maybe someone lined it. I'm sorry. I will, let me disable annotations. Sorry. All right. So here in brothers meetings, Pharaoh was the one who started the conversation, right? He asked, what is your occupation? But here we see Jacob taking the initiative. And what is interesting about this text, or this 47, 7 to 10 is, oh, maybe I cannot erase it. Sorry. Do you guys see this annotation? Yeah, I don't know how, oh, okay, good. All right, sorry about that. All right, so yeah, this may look complicated, but Genesis 47, 7 to 10 may be structuralized like this. And this is called chiastic structure, or chiasm. And that's a technical term that we don't have to remember, but it looks like a sandwich. If you see, for example, the very first and the last is correlated. In verse 7, it says, then Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. And the end, it says, and he, Jacob, went out from the presence of Pharaoh. These correlate. And the next one, like sandwich, B, we see, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And then B, how do you call this? I don't know, B something. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, right? And in the middle, we see first Pharaoh speaking to Jacob. So how old are you, right? And then next, we see Jacob answering Pharaoh. So this is my age, right? So this is a very a beautifully structured passage. And what catches my eyes in this structure is that there is an identical phrase in this text, which is this B, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And actually, well, this is Hebrew, and I think you don't have to be able to actually read Hebrew to see that these two sentences or phrases look the same, right? Except one just marker, they are like completely identical. This passage is like sandwiched with these phrases, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And this is something very interesting because, as in Seventh-day Adventist International Bible Commentary says, Dukan is the author, he says, it is unusual that an inferior, Jacob in this instance, blesses a superior Pharaoh. In usual occasions, blessings was given from a superior to an inferior, right? Because superiors supposedly have more to give than the inferior. And I mean, obviously, in this circumstance, well, Jacob is a stranger in this land, right? Jacob is brought before this monarch of this huge kingdom. Like socially speaking, politically speaking, religiously speaking, I mean, whatever speaking, Jacob seems to be inferior to Pharaoh. And yet, even before Pharaoh opened his mouth, Jacob is like blessing Pharaoh. Okay. And on this, I found it interesting that Ellen White says, the patriarch, Jacob, was a stranger in royal court, but amid the sublime scenes of nature, he had communed with a mightier monarch, capital M, monarch, referring to God. And now, in conscious superiority, he raised his hand and blessed Pharaoh. So here, Ellen White shares the insight as to why Jacob did this. The reason was that because Jacob realized his superiority in regard to his relationship with God, the King of Kings, he took the initiative and blessed Pharaoh at this moment. And I'm sure Pharaoh was surprised by this. I mean, who can bless Pharaoh, right? Who can bless Pharaoh? Pharaoh asks Jacob, he says, and Pharaoh said to Jacob in verse 8, how many are the days of the years of your life? Now, this is a complicated way to ask, how old are you? Okay. How many are the days of the years of your life? And apparently, Jacob looked like he was not young. And perhaps that was the reason why Pharaoh sought to ask this question, in addition to this man blessing him. And on this, again, Dugan writes, in ancient Egypt, 110 years old is considered the ideal age that the most blessed person could attain. So it seems like Jacob looked somewhere around that age. Right. So instead of asking Jacob's occupation or whatever else, whatever business matter, Pharaoh asks Jacob, how old are you? Are you perhaps around that age, that ideal age, the most blessed person could attain? Right. And I want to see how Jacob answers to this question. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are, how many years? 130 years. I'm sure that Pharaoh was just blown away by this statement. I mean, for them, 110 years old was the ideal age that most blessed person could ever attain. And yet here he sees this person who has just blessed him. He's saying, you know, I'm 130 years old, like well past 110 years old, right? And what is further, I believe, astonishing to Pharaoh was the following sentence. Now, I want you to hear this carefully. So he says, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few, what did I say? Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. Now, let me be clear, or let me assist Jacob here. Yes, sure. Compared to his fathers, he lived shorter. Yeah. His father, Isaac, lived till 180 years old. His grandfather, Abraham, lived till 175 years old. No. And actually, Jacob lived 17 years more from this point. So he actually passes away at the age of 147 years old. So yeah, sure, his days did not attain his father's. Yeah, I agree. However, I mean, do you call this few, right? I mean, for Pharaoh, 110 is like almost unimaginable, almost unattainable age. And here, this man who has lived for 130 years old is saying, you know, few are my days. And not only that, see how he characterizes his life, his days or his years of 130. He says, those days, my life of 130 years have been evil. I mean, come on, right? I mean, in Pharaoh's mind, 110 years old person is the most blessed person. And yet here, we see 130 years old man saying that his life has been evil. It's been miserable and short. How can that be, right? And yet, if we actually look back at his life, yes, his life was not easy. I mean, when we talk about Jacob, there are many stories that we can talk about. I mean, his life is full of illustrious stories. You know, beginning with exchanging birthright with a suit with his brother Esau. You know, later on, he deceives Esau, his father as well, to get the privilege, get the blessing. And yet after that has been found out by his brother Esau, he's hunted. So he runs away. And along the way, he has this famous dream, Jacob's ladder, angels coming up and down. He sees that God is guiding. And he reaches his relative's place, Uncle Laban, and he finds the love of his life, Rachel. Right? So he works for 7 years just to marry this love, Rachel. And after the marriage ceremony, when he wakes up in the bed, he sees her sister lying in his bed, which is horrible to think about, right? Now he's being deceived by Laban, and he works for another 7 plus 3 years. I think the total was 20 years because of Laban's unfair treatment. Jacob again has to run away from the family. And they kind of reconcile along the way. He fights with God. And it seems like a happy ending. He meets Esau, but Esau forgives him. So there, the reconciliation takes place. And we might think, happily ever after. And yet, no, not actually. After the reconciliation between Jacob and his brother took place, now his daughter is raped by one of the men of one of the cities. And the brothers got enraged to this. The brothers go, lies to the people of the city, and they just massacre the entire city. Like, unbelievable. Like, how can they do that? But they do that, right? Not just that, after that, the beloved son Joseph, who was the firstborn of Rachel, his love, is now sold to slavery by his own brothers, by Jacob's son. And he remains not knowing that Joseph has been sold to slavery up until this moment that we just read, or a bit before that moment. Right? He thought that Joseph has been killed. Yeah, so for sure, Jacob's life has been full of misery, like full of difficulties, full of suffering, right? And thus he says that my life, for 130 years of this short life, like evil was abundant. And yet what is interesting here is this. Like, was Jacob not blessed? I mean, in fact, he has a close relationship with blessing, doesn't he? I mean, beginning with deceiving his father and stealing the blessing of his Esau, he did get the blessing, didn't he? I mean, after Jacob's father, Isaac, realizes that he had blessed the wrong son, he said, I cannot take it back. I mean, I've already blessed Jacob and it's already his. So Jacob has already been blessed here. And for another story, Jacob wrestles with God at night. And here again, we see him getting blessing. And I will just read a couple of passages from these two stories. This one is found in the story of Jacob deceiving his father. Sorry for the noise if you hear. But it says in Genesis chapter 27, 11 to 14, it says, but Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. Now, you know this famous story of him, tying animal, how do you call it? Animal skin, so that he may have hairy skin. But I want you to notice why Jacob is hesitant to do this. It says, perhaps my father will feel me, and listen to this, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. So apparently from this story, this text itself, the reason why Jacob hesitated was not because he was guilty, he would feel guilty, of deceiving his father or stealing blessing from his brother, but because of the possibility that he might not receive blessing but curse, right? So to this, his mother answers. His mother said to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, bring them to me." So the mother is essentially saying, if that case happens, then I will take on that curse. So go. And yeah, what a good son Jacob was. So he went, right? No more hesitation, because even if curse would befall on him, that curse can be taken by his mother, right? So he was so obsessed with blessing to the point of deceiving his father, stealing from his brother, right? In another circumstance, this is another famous story, again, referring back to the wrestle with God. After wrestling with this supernatural being for the whole night, and after being even injured, I mean, he cannot walk properly afterwards, right? His joint has been disjointed. And yet, then he said, well, this is the men who came to fight. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Like how persistent Jacob was in getting blessing. I mean, think about fighting. I mean, he is in danger of life if he continues to, grapple with this man. I mean, he cannot walk. How can he fight, right? I mean, loss is obvious. And yet here, Jacob is like, you have to bless me or I cannot let you go. He's risking his life to get this blessing thing. So as you can see, this entire life, Jacob has been receiving blessings. He has been actually getting blessings. I mean, after this, we see Jacob receiving this name, new name, Israel, right? So he has actually received blessings, and yet he explains his life as miserable and few. And yet, after 130 years of life, we see a change happening in Jacob. This is Genesis chapter 47:10. It reads, "And Jacob did what? Jacob asked for blessing from Pharaoh." Does it say that? It says, "And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh." I mean, if you know this person, Jacob, and how he has been for 130 years, you would expect what he would do in the presence of Pharaoh, which is to ask for blessing, right? And yet here, we see Jacob, instead of asking for blessing, conferring blessing to Pharaoh, even twice, in this very short text. He comes in, blesses Pharaoh, and as he leaves, he blesses Pharaoh. And let me tell you, I actually did a research. This is not a complicated research, but I run a research. And this is Genesis chapter 47, verse 7 is the very first time Jacob offers blessing to someone else. Though in many of his stories, blessing appears in Jacob's life. And yet this is the very first time Jacob consciously and intentionally blesses someone with his own decision, with his own volition. And I think this is something. This is something. And afterwards, what is interesting is that, well, Genesis has only a few more chapters left, but we see Jacob blessing first Joseph's sons and blessing his own sons. And that's how the story ends. That's how Jacob's life ends. So up until Genesis 47:7, we see Jacob with blessing in a relationship that he has been getting, receiving blessings. And yet after Genesis 47:7 and onwards, we see him only giving blessings. He no more receives blessings, but he blesses people. And on this, Ellen White writes, in his first greeting to Joseph, Jacob had spoken as if, with this joyful ending to his long anxiety and sorrow, he was ready to die. Yes, when he found out and when he actually saw Joseph, whom he thought that had been dead a long time ago, he thought, okay, I'm ready to die. I'm satisfied. And yet, 17 years, how many years? 17 years were yet to be granted him in the peaceful retirement of Goshen. These years were in happy contrast to those that had preceded them. Now, does 17 years ring some bells in your mind? Did this number come up somewhere? If you actually go back to earlier chapter, you see that the age Joseph was taken from Jacob, and when he was taken away from him, was 17 years old. It was 17 years that Jacob had this great life enjoying his son, and he was taken away. And here, this may be just a coincidence, but it is reminiscent, and it seems like that happy 17 years has been given back to Jacob at the end of his life. And furthermore, I love how Ellen White puts it. I love how she writes. She says, Jacob's last years brought an evening of tranquility and repose after a troubled and weary day. Clouds had gathered dark above his path, yet his sun set clear, and the radiance of heaven illumined his parting hours. So his life experience after that 130 years, that last 17 years, had been almost opposite of what he has been experiencing for 130 years. It was a delightful repose. It was a settling down. It was a calm moment of his entire life. And here I see what I call the paradox of blessings. The paradox of blessings. Paradox is a tenet contrary to received opinion. It's just taken from Merriam-Webster dictionary. But I mean, when we think about blessings, we think that the more you get blessings, the more happy your life will be. Don't you think so? I mean, isn't that the usual notion that we give to blessings? And less blessings, less happiness. So we need more blessings. And we thus ask for blessings, right? And yet what is interesting about this story, what is fascinating about the story of Jacob is that for 130 years, he had been asking for blessings and he had been actually receiving, getting blessings. And yet he characterizes those years as evil and miserable. And sure, his life has been difficult. And yet once his relationship with blessing changed from that of getting to giving, he's experiencing this peacefulness, this calmness, this actual reconciliation of his whole family that has not come about for the last 130 years. And this can but remind me of this text. It's found in Acts 20:35. This word is attributed to Jesus by Paul. And Jesus is said to have said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And I'm thinking that Jacob could probably agree with this statement from his own experience. And after all, I mean, was not the purpose or the mission of this family line being chosen for this? I mean, when we go back to the very beginning of this family, the call of Abraham, it reads, now the Lord said to Abraham, Genesis 12, I will bless you. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. God's calling for Abraham was that I will bless you and you will be blessings to people. Right? And this promise or this call was given to Jacob himself at that Jacob's latter experience. God says, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So what was the family's calling, as well as Jacob's own calling? It was that they be a blessing. And for that, God blessed them. Right. And so, here, again, I'm going back to the beginning. We see a great transition taking place, moving from Genesis to Exodus, moving from the time of patriarchs to the Israelites, moving from sojourning around the land of Canaan to Egypt, and then again out of Egypt, Exodus. Here we see this great shift taking place in the history of God's people. And yet, in the midst, in the center of this great transition of God's people, we see this one man, 130 years old man, being changed from being a receiver to a giver of blessings. We see this great patriarch as one human being who has struggled for 130 years to become a giver, finally, consciously taking up his calling to give blessings to other people. Right. And I love this story for so many reasons, and I cannot tell you all of the things that I'm fascinated with, but this is just my own choice, but if there is one thing that really touched me or touches me as I read this story, is God's patience. I mean, come on, this great patriarch, who has the name Israel, struggled for 130 years to become a giver of blessings. Right? Up until this point, he was so stubborn that he had to receive blessings. That was his only focus. Give me blessings. And for that, I risk everything. And here, after 130 years of few and miserable, evil life, by God's outworking with patience for 130 years, by God's grace, this man is giving a blessing to other people. And this encourages me. Not that I can use this as an excuse of me not growing up in Christ's maturity, but in a sense that, yes, us becoming more like his people, more like Christ, or more in his image, is a lifetime process. And yes, we fail. We make mistakes and we make ourselves fall into evil things, right? Don't we? And we at times feel discouraged, and maybe we feel like God cannot bear anymore with me because I make this mistake so many times, or I cannot become a better person, or I cannot be more loving, or I cannot be more gracious, or I cannot be forgiving, whatever. We sometimes feel like we want to give up on ourselves. And what this story teaches me, or what this story touches me on, is the fact that God bore patiently with Jacob for 130 years, so that he himself, as a person, would take up that calling to become not only a receiver, but also a giver. And that actually happens. And we see that evidence in the book of Genesis, in which this one man's life, this one man's character has been totally changed. And through this story, I'm not telling you that, okay, if I start giving blessings or if I start blessing other people, then I would make my life happy. No, that's not what I'm teaching here. And I don't think it's that simple. I don't think there is a direct like cause and effect relationship with us being a giver, receiver, and we spending happy life or evil life. I'm not saying that there is, that simple equation there. However, I would like us to think of ourselves, of what we are called to be as Christians, what it means for us to follow Christ. And I mean, after all, who is this Christ that we are following? What kind of a person he was? And what kind of blessing he has given us? And I want us to remember that. I want us to rethink on that as we continue our path as a Christian in this difficult time, and yet with this comfort that God has not given up on Jacob for 130 years. And the belief that he won't give up on us as well. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this story of Jacob. Well, not just story, but we thank you for how you have treated Jacob, this man, this great man, and yet a human being. And may this story remind us that you are gracious enough, patient enough to work with us, to live with us along our lives. And that you can change us to be more like our Master, Jesus Christ. May we reassess of our relationship to blessings. Thank you for our blessings. May we not only be receiving, but be giving. So we ask for abundant blessings upon us. Give us blessings and make us blessings for those around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.